Chapter 3, Application of Form, Mass, and Line. Here we are back in Photoshop, as I'm going to be demonstrating on how to apply this using the line, mass, and form based on a still life, any kind of reference, or any kind of observational drawing. Now I know we've been doing a lot of still lifes this whole term, and some of you are probably a little bit tired from it, so you're welcome to use any of the landscape references that you either take yourself or some of the ones that I have provided. I'm going to start off by doing some thumbnails like we've been learning for the last couple of weeks. You can work fairly rough like I'm doing here in order to find a quick compositional layout. Now for these, I won't require rough thumbnails, but I recommend doing them for yourself while you're planning this out. This is definitely something you should develop a habit on doing, is starting off with just some really quick thumbnails or quick sketches before going into a finished drawing or painting. This relatively small and short investment in time is going to save you a lot of hours in the long run. So this is getting close to what I like. I don't like the tangent up here, or at least close to the tangent, but it's getting pretty close. I think what I'm going to do is just bring up the frame a little bit more to the top and a little bit more to the right. The reason I'm adding more to the right is I just want more of that shadow to show. So from there, I'm basically just going to pick that one to start me off. Now if you're using digital, of course it's really easy to make a quick copy and enlarge it as a rough pass. Now I know doing this traditionally makes it a little bit harder, but that's why we have tracing paper and copy machines. Now even back when I didn't have Photoshop and I was doing illustrations as a student, I would take this to the printer and just blow it up maybe at a 400 or 500% in order to get started on a quick illustration or even a long illustration, and trying to keep everything intact composition wise. Since we've already started with a rough line work in terms of getting the thumbnail sketch all blocked in, I highly recommend just starting on the line part of the exercise. From here, all you have to do is clean up your line work. Here I'm making a lot of adjustments as well. So I noticed that the lemon, I put it off to sort of the left center, but I could see that I totally miss the top of the block that it's on top of. So you'll see me make quite a bit of adjustments and changes as I move along, refining my line work. but they're not, but they aren't such drastic changes that they are totally making a different composition. That's definitely the main reason why I stress getting a good design or layout during the thumbnail phase. So pretty much half the work is done already. And from here, it's all about just changing proportions, getting the shapes and forms a little bit more accurate, fine-tuning the actual contours of the objects themselves, and maybe even some of the perspective lines. The main advice I have into sticking with the line work style is, even though you can block in the shadows like I've done here, you don't want to do any kind of hatching or any kind of rendering with the shadows. Unless, of course, you are going for a line style with the secondary style as the form. But to start us off, I just want you guys to stick with purely line work. Think about the line weight. You can put information down just like I've done here with the texturing and laying out some of the shadows. And remember, you can create a lot of form and depth with just purely line work, thinking about thick versus thin lines. This is definitely something that can be achieved both traditionally and digitally. If you're using pen, of course, make sure you start with a thin line, or you could even mix some of the media where you can do a pencil lay-in and then you can ink it afterwards. So that's definitely up for grabs if you want to try more of the traditional approach, but having a clean set of lines towards the very end. And from here, this is pretty much as far as I'll take it for the line style variation. This is also enough information that I can use it for the next part of the exercise when we're dealing with the form style variant. Now, it may not look like I changed anything here, but I did make a save and a duplicate of the line work that I did. So if you're doing this digitally, make sure you save your work, make a duplicate layer. Otherwise, if you're just working with one, you'll go over the first part of the homework, basically. So with the form style, it's basically all about light and shadow. This is something we've done in weeks 4 and 5. So all you have to do is block it all in. Now, one of the other important things about this type of style, especially when you're trying to keep it purely form, we are going to try to ignore the actual local value of the objects. So basically, the only things I'm concerned about is the stuff like we learned in week 4. So highlight, halftone, or midtone, core shadows, cast shadows, and reflected light. So in terms of actually doing the wood texture, or even some of the smaller texture that I put in the line work, you'll see me erase some of that out because I just want to mainly focus on the big light and shadow that describes all the forms of these objects. So here you can see that a lot of the line work has disappeared. I've either gone ahead and erased it, or I painted right on top of it. If you're doing this traditionally, you either want to redraw this again, Or what you can do is have tracing paper, and you could just do the form study on top. That way you still have the benefit of the exact line work that you put down. And then all you have to worry about is the rendering. So my biggest advice for this type of style variant is trying to get rid of the line work and also not being too caught up on the local values of each object, which is easier said than done. It's definitely takes some practice to kind of see past that. But again, all we're trying to do is focus on the light and shadows the best we can. And then after this, we're going to deal with the local values and put them down for the mass style variant. So last but not least, we are going to be doing the mass variant. So from here, I'm definitely paying attention to my swatches, doing a lot of color picking from there. Because the lemon, the tomato, and the other still life blocks, I want to make sure they all read in different values. So the tomato is definitely the darkest color, which means it's going to receive the darkest value. Now I know many of you wish that this might have been done in real time, but I assure you that I'm not doing anything new that I haven't gone over yet in terms of the digital techniques. And to prove that, I've basically done this entire demonstration with one brush, and that is just the basic round brush tool with the slight variation in the size and opacity. It's basically just acting like a marker would. So the harder you press, the darker it gets. And then the lighter it is, it's just slightly lighter. Now, I will admit that I was tempted to use my textured brushes for more of my sort of natural setting in terms of painting these. But for the sake of the demonstration and to prove to you that you can achieve a decent painting, to finish just using a simple brush tool. Now, I actually thought this would take me a bit longer in terms of the demonstration. But when it comes to doing it purely mass or purely local value, it's actually quite simple. So I'm actually ignoring all of the shadows, all of pretty much everything we learned from week 4 and 5. And we're purely doing this in terms of what the objects are colored in order to achieve this design look. So at the tail end of this demonstration, you'll see me use the lasso tool to clean up my shapes and to keep a nice, even, flat value going across. Now, the easiest way to actually achieve this look is to start off with the lasso tool at the very beginning, but for some reason I decided to just paint it all out. However, my main objective was to make sure all of the objects read at a different value based on the actual setup. And the hardest thing about this will probably be trying to ignore the light and shadow and just make a judgment call on how to separate each object. So to do this assignment properly, you're going to want to pick a still life with objects that have different colors or different values at the very least. You definitely don't want to pick an object that's just all white, like some of the more basic still lifes that I've provided. Because if we're going for the complete pure mass style, everything will just be white. Once you've cleaned up your shapes and ensure that all of the objects have different values based on their color, you can call this one finished. To conclude this lecture, here are the 3 different images that I've demonstrated in the different style variation. So we have the line, form, and mass, and how each one has the different characteristics when we're talking about the style triangle. Now when it comes to doing this for yourself, make sure you pick a subject that has different values or color. That way you can do the mass part of this assignment properly. And you want to pick simple lighting, just like you guys have been doing for the last few weeks. Now when it comes to the form part, you also want to make sure you have a decent simple lighting, just like the still lifes you guys have been creating for yourself. If you guys choose to do a landscape, you want to make sure there's a direct lighting and not something that's in total ambient light. That will be a little bit more challenging for the form study. Now when it comes to actually mixing these styles together and how to apply that, I'll talk about it a little bit more during the Q&A session, which I can further elaborate on mixing such as the form and mass style, or the line and form, or whatever you guys want to see demonstrated. Other than that, I hope this further clarified the differences between line, form, and mass when we're talking about the different concepts of style variation. From there, let's move on to doing some of the homework for this week.